Do you know who became the first victim of Auschwitz? No, they weren't Jews, not the Roma, not Soviet prisoners. The first victims were Polish teenagers, teachers, priests, students, people who had no idea they were walking into a camp that would soon become a factory of death. Today we're going back to 1940, to the moment when Auschwitz wasn't yet called the symbol of the Holocaust, when there were no gas chambers, when it was only beginning, and every sunrise became the first step into hell. Poland was occupied. The prisons in Krakow, Katowice, and Warsaw were overflowing. The Germans couldn't keep up with the arrests of Poles suspected of resistance. Emergency measures followed. On April 27, 1940, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler ordered the creation of a new concentration camp near the town of Auschwitz. A convenient location, former Austrian army barracks, a railway nearby, silence and isolation from the big cities. The plan was simple: to turn those barracks into a detention centre for political prisoners. Not a word about mass extermination, not a word about gas, only the isolation of dangerous elements. But behind those words, genocide was already taking shape. The first commandant of the camp was appointed. SS Obersturmbannführer Rudolf Höss, a man of cold logic and no emotion. His task, to make the camp operational within weeks. With him came 30 German criminals transferred from Sachsenhausen. They would become kapos, prisoners allowed to beat, humiliate, and even kill other inmates. The camp began to breathe, and then came June 14th, 1940. The first official transport, 728 men from the Polish town of Tarnów, most of them young, between 16 and 40, students, scouts, teachers, workers, priests. They were taken to Auschwitz, not in cattle cars, as Jews would be later, but in ordinary passenger coaches. At the platform, SS guards barked orders, forcing them to march in formation. No one explained where they were, but these men became the first blood. They were issued prison uniforms with red triangles, the mark of political prisoners. Their heads were shaved, their names erased. Only numbers remained. The first, 31, the last, 758. Numbers 1 through 30 had already been given to the criminal kapos. From the very beginning, the hierarchy of horror was absolute. The barracks of Auschwitz still didn't look like a factory of death. They were old army buildings, but discipline was brutal. Wake-up call at 4 in the morning, roll call on the parade ground, forced labour, meaningless and exhausting, carrying stones, digging ditches, building walls they would later be forced to tear down again. This wasn't work. It was a method of breaking people. Food, at best, half a loaf of bread a day and a bowl of watery soup. Water itself, almost none. No sleep, extreme heat, or bitter cold. Beatings were part of the routine. The kapos had full power and their cruelty was encouraged. One survivor later recalled, "We didn't die from the work. We died from systematic humiliation, from the moment they stopped seeing us as human beings." The first recorded death was the murder of Polish priest Franciszek Gnitso. He was beaten to death for refusing to remove his crucifix. Then came dozens more, then hundreds. By the autumn of 1940, over 200 prisoners had already died, and this was only the beginning. There were no gas chambers yet, but death already walked the corridors of the camp. Himmler arrived in person. He was pleased. Everything worked. Everything was under control. He ordered the camp expanded. New barracks were built, fences electrified, special zones created for particularly dangerous inmates. Execution orders were now signed daily. By the end of 1940, the camp began receiving Soviet POWs. Then Jews, Roma, the stateless, the asocial. Auschwitz was turning into a machine, a slow, cold, finely tuned machine built to destroy human will. But it's important to understand mass extermination hadn't started yet. That would come in 1942, after the Wannsee Conference, when the Nazis officially adopted the final solution to the Jewish question. That's when Auschwitz-Birkenau would be built, and the camp would become a true death machine. Yet without that first blood, the machine would not have existed. Without those who endured the camp in 1940, the Nazis would never have perfected their algorithms of annihilation. They practiced on Poles, on teenagers, on teachers, on people who believed they might survive the ordeal. Most didn't. Today, in the Auschwitz Museum, photographs of those first prisoners still hang on the walls. Black and white portraits. Boys who were 17. Men with exhausted eyes. Priests with lowered heads. Their faces mark the beginning of the darkest chapter of the 20th century. When we think of Auschwitz, we think of the Holocaust, of gas chambers, of millions of victims. But none of that began overnight.